All right, good to see everybody again. Just first, I'll wrap up the Tulane game. Like I said afterward, it was a good win. I think anytime you can go on the road and come from behind in the fourth quarter, and then it was tied in the fourth quarter and go to overtime, and you're starting a freshman in his first start, it's if you can find a way to win, it's a good thing. It was really a story of two games. I think if you said that you were going to outgain an opponent by over 100 yards, have 12 more first downs than them, and have close to 550 yards of offense, you think you're going to win maybe going away. But then you lose the turnover battle by 2. You have 2 red zone trips that you turn the ball over and miss a field goal, and then you give up touchdown passes of 52 and 74 yards or 76 yards. You say, how are you going to win a game like that? And I think overall we kind of won the statistical battle, but all those things in terms of turnovers, missed opportunities in the red zone, giving up big plays, that it became a 4-quarter game and an overtime game. But we found a way to win. It's good to be 1-0, but it was certainly a costly win. As you know, we lost really 2 of our best players for the season. Justin Herron, an all-conference tackle for us, will now miss the year with a knee injury, and Kobe Davis, who was really coming on and starting really to become like a third starter at safety for us. So it's just one of those years with ACLs. Kobe and Justin become the 6th and 7th player now we've lost for the year now with ACLs. And but that's why you recruit. That's why you build depth. Those things can never be an excuse for us not to be successful, and we have other good players. Certainly in the O-line, we have good depth, and we may pull the red shirts off of some safeties now to help us on special teams. But in every case that a player went down, the next guy up really stepped up. I mean, Jack Frudenthal is our starting tight end. 6 plays into it, he's ejected. But Brandon Chapman was ready to play, and he played at a high level. Kobe goes down, and Travion Red ends up playing a lot more snaps than we anticipated, and he played really well. We have always had, in my mind, 6 starters on the offensive line. So if you watch us in camp, there were always times that we would take out everybody on the line and say, hey, if this guy's down, this is what we would do. So Jake Benzinger played left tackle during camp. Nate Gillum played right tackle. Patrick Osterhage plugs right in, and he's really a starter. Him and Nate were both starters, and Patrick played well, and Jake played well at left tackle, and Nate played well at right tackle. And there's just so many examples of that, of whether Sage Surratt stepping up for Scotty Washington. So in all of those cases that a guy went down, really the next guy was ready. And we just got to continue to do that and develop that in our program, because that's one game. There's 11 more to go. So we know this is going to happen. Hopefully not season-ending injuries, but injuries are part of football, and you have to prepare that next guy to prepare like a starter and have a starter's mentality. So when it's their time to go in there, I mean, Brandon Chapman had really not played much here in 3 years, and he played 100 snaps of football and played well. So, that's the challenge of the season, is getting guys ready. Fortunately, game 1, guys stepped up, and I love the way we handled overtime. I mean, their sidelines was going nuts. I thought ours was very composed, cool, collective. There was a kind of a serious focus to what they had to do, and I thought our kids showed great poise in the overtime, and the defense probably had their best series of the game, and then the offensive line and the running game, and Cade, 7 straight runs, and it didn't come down to a field goal. So again, we're 1-0. We're far from a finished product. There were enough mistakes in that game that we could take 2 weeks and not correct them all. But that's football. It's not a perfect game, but our kids played hard and gave great effort. And again, we're fortunate, but we'll take it. So moving on to Towson, this is always the week that Les will accuse me of making them sound like some NFL team. But again, it's just the nature of how I came up in coaching. This is the level that I coached at the FCS level for many, many years. My first 2 head jobs were at that level. And whether it was Brian Finneran or Brian Westbrook or Tim Hightower or the countless NFL players I coached at the FCS level, I know this is good football. I was a head coach in this league for 4 years. I was a coordinator in this league for 3. And this is, in my opinion, the best FCS conference in the country. And Towson has players. I think they're really well coached. I've known Rob Ambrose, their head coach. I've known him for 20 years, over 20 years. So he was the coordinator at Towson when I was the head coach at Fordham, and then went on to Connecticut and other places, and is a really good offensive mind. And 3 years ago had Towson a game away from the national championship. And they also have some guys on defense that I hired. They have 2 coaches on defense that at one point were on my staff at Fordham, and they've revamped their defense. They're very sound. They have a lot of guys on their football team that at one point were deemed to be Power 5 players. So they have a lot of transfers, whether it's the Greenwood kid at receiver who was at Kentucky, or Flacco who was at Rutgers in Western Michigan. You can go down their roster, and these were guys that were, 3-star BCS Power 5 players, and for whatever reason things didn't work out. And that's the one advantage at FCS, is that these guys can go there and play right away. So they've got skill. Like I said, Greenwood, they have a receiver, Leatherberry, that we were really impressed with, that played well. Their quarterback is Tom Flacco, who's the younger brother of the starter at the Ravens. And he is tough, athletic, has a strong arm, is a good football player. That a good friend of ours coached him at Western Michigan and spoke very highly of him. And on defense, they have a player at every level that certainly is a good player. On the D-line, we really like the end Carter, linebacker Wallace, and the safety Fenner. To me, all show up and are capable of playing at a high level. So you always want the greatest improvement in your football team to happen from week 1 to week 2. We got 2 extra days, and believe me, after watching the Tulane film, there's a lot of areas that we need to get better. So Towson is up next, and we're ready to go. So any questions?
You mentioned a couple times the mistakes from the Tulane game. What are the things that you've really been honing in on?
Well, I mean, as well as Sam played, and at times he played not like a true freshman, but there were a handful of plays that were just not wise plays. I mean, the one pick in the red zone, it took him a quarter to settle in. And once he settled in, he played well. And you want him to be confident. And the one play he made, the Cade Carney on a 3rd down, that was like a John Wolford type play, scrambling, run out of bounds, pitch the ball. But you got to control that stuff a little bit. And then he forced it on that one red zone play that ended up in a pick. And it's just, we've got to coach those plays out of them. And it's good to be creative, but you also have to know the time and the place. In the secondary, I mean, both touchdowns we gave up were just awful coverage busts. I mean, the one time we lined up in a way that we don't even line up. And those are 2 veterans. I mean, those Cam Glenn and Asang are 2 good players that have played a lot of football for us. And, you can't lose your mind for a play. And then the other touchdown we gave up was a double move against cover 2. I mean, as an offense, you don't even want to run a double move versus cover 2. It's a dead play. You see that coverage, you just forget about it. You go to the other side. And it's just, it's in some cases guys that haven't played before, and that's always going to happen. You're always going to have guys that haven't played, that get out there for the first time, and they lose their mind. They put their eyes in the wrong place. They're not looking at the right keys. And they've got to learn from game 1 to game 2 that these are the progressions, these are your rules, this is your eye discipline. And I mean, I could list 100 things. But it's really, in some ways, when it's all said and done, a perfect opener. You go on the road, you face adversity, you make a lot of mistakes, you still find a way to win, and you're 1-0. But there's a lot of corrections that you can make that are real corrections, not just fabricated, you're going to be hard on them because you need to be hard on them.
After reviewing the tape, did Sam exceed your expectations in game 1?
I mean, we named him our starting quarterback. I expect our starting quarterback to play well. Now, having said that, Tulane clearly came out there of a mindset of, we are not going to let you run the football. We're going to make you beat us with your freshman quarterback. I mean, people can be, say we didn't run the ball well and critical of the O-line. The way we were being defended, there was an extra hat, and the extra hat wasn't on the surface. The extra hat was right there. So, you don't run the ball. It's hard at times that when there's a guy you can't block. I mean, everybody in the offensive line can do their job and block their guy, and we weren't perfect on the O-line, but we were being defended in a way that clearly Tulane was saying, we dare you to throw the football. And so we threw the football. So, going into it, Connor, you asked me, are we going to run the ball more and play more conservative? The nature of our offense is you can't do that. If you're going to be if we just said that, hey, we're going to force the run because of who we have on the O-line and who we have at running back, and you get defended the way Tulane defends you, I mean, it's running into a brick wall the whole time. There's going to be a guy right there near the line of scrimmage you can't block. And we figured out quickly that that's what they were doing, and we were going to have to throw the ball to win. And you go out there and you're, 31 of 51 and throw for 378 yards and a couple of touchdowns. That's a good game for a true freshman. So did he exceed my expectations? I mean, I had high expectations. That's why I named him our starter. The fact that we were able to execute the passing game at the level we did in his first start against what I feel is a quality opponent, I'm certainly happy with that aspect of our game. I think at the end of the season, that win will look better than maybe it did. And I read somewhere, I think only, in terms of FBS versus FBS, I think only 13 visiting teams won this week. Some number like that. So Steve it was less than, I think it was less than 15. I read somewhere that going into last night's game, we were one of 12, and so last night the visiting team won. So it's not easy to win on the road against a quality opponent, and Tulane was what we thought they were. Quarterback was a good player, and the receiver number 5, he certainly scared us going into the game. We knew, that was a guy that we identified that, hey, that guy would play for us, and he showed why.
I know it's still fresh and early, but is there any thought as to what the road forward is for Justin Huron?
We've talked to Justin, and we've talked to compliance, and I think the plan is, because of the new rule, that he can get a 6th year. And we've talked with Justin, and he's talked with his family, and we're hoping and planning that he'll come back and have a 6th year with us next year. So,
is that an appeal process? Or is it
it's a new thing. If you're redshirted your first year and then have a medical, you get the 6th year. I think there was a player at Clemson who got that this year, and that was kind of new legislation. That was, I think this year was the first year. So, the glass half empty is we just lost one of our best players for the 18 season. The glass half full is we just picked up a heck of a recruit for the 19 class.
You mentioned the extra hat for Tulane having in there, and that impacting the running game. Nate Gilliam was talking to us earlier, and he kind of had a smile on his face talking about what he sees from Towson's defense, and said they don't really like to blitz a lot, and so he didn't necessarily say this. Kind of made it seem like it may be easier for you guys to run block a little bit better against Towson. You think?
I guess Nate won't be doing press conferences here anymore. It's hard to pull that much out of one game. I think a lot of times you go into openers and you're not really sure what the opponent's going to do, and there's a tendency to kind of simplify things. We certainly kept our defense simple for Tulane just because we weren't sure what they were going to do. The structure of their defense certainly allows them to put the extra guy in the hat, in the box. Last week against Morgan, they really didn't do that. which doesn't mean they're not going to do it this week. The structure of their defense would certainly allow that. And, football is, it's a numbers game and it's geometry, that you're trying to find numbers and you're trying to find leverage. And, if you keep that extra hat out of the box, you should be able to run the ball, but you still got to block people and make people miss. But you have numbers and you have leverage. When that extra guy is in the box, you don't have numbers, and a lot of times you don't have leverage because they're able to angle the front in a way that delivers the ball to that extra defender. So, what they did against Morgan may not be what they do against us. They certainly have the ability to blitz. The structure of their defense easily allows that. In terms of how they set the front, the displacement of their Sam or their rover, their corner, their safeties. We certainly anticipate they have the ability to do that, but you're looking at a one-game sample.
One thing that Nate told me, he said with Justin going down, that the offensive line this week was playing with a new sense of urgency. Would you agree with that at all, or would you say it's same old for them?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes when something like that happens on good teams, it becomes a little bit of a rallying point. And, you hope guys realize how tenuous everything is, that it's one play and it can be taken away. We have depth on the, losing Justin will hurt us. He's I think, one of the best offensive linemen in the ACC. There's no way you lose a player of that caliber and you're better. However, we are good and we have depth on the O-line. This is not an excuse now for us to not play well in the O-line. I mean, you look at our O-line and we still have 7, 8, 9 players that are capable of playing good football in this league. And, so they will miss Justin, but we still should be confident, and those guys should believe in themselves, and we believe in them. We still think we have a good offensive line. It's not as good. Anytime you lose a really good player, you're not as good, but I think we're still really good there. So again, I don't look at that now as a weakness of our football team. I still think it's a strength.
Though I'm not asking about the specific player for you to comment on that call, but do you have any thoughts in general about the targeting rule and about ejecting a player early in the game, that could have an impact?
I mean, it's, I get it with player safety. It just seems like you've worked all year, all camp. It's your 4th year in the program, you're a starter. And that certainly wasn't an intentional hit. It just, I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to do the rules to enforce player safety. It's your first target of the year. It wasn't intentional. It's not like he ducked his head early and, it was just one of those bang plays that happens. And I get it, and I'm all for player safety. And at the same time, I feel bad for Jack Freudenthal that he did something unintentional, and something he's worked 9 months for it was taken away for him in 6 plays on something that wasn't intentional. I mean, part of it was the returner ducked his head at the last second. And some of those hits are, so again, I think that ship has passed. I think for player safety, and the amount of those hits has gone down. I don't know. Do you say that, your first one of the season is 15 yards and your second one after that is, I don't know. It just, to lose a player like that on a bang play that wasn't intentional. But I also don't ever want to say that we should ever take rules away that are for player safety. When a play happened, I mean, he was in shock. Now you go back and watch the film, and I'm not saying it was an incorrect call, but clearly it was not intentional. Like, he didn't lead or spear, or he just dropped his head at the last second. And we have to do a better job as coaches to make sure he doesn't do that.
Coach, both Ryan and Phil and Ryan were voted captains this year. What does their leadership mean to this team in both, and also especially with Justin going down, what does their leadership mean to the rest of the offensive line?
Well, I mean, it means the same that it did before Justin went down, but those guys both lead in different ways. You know, Ryan, extremely smart football player, and he's kind of the drill sergeant out there, telling everybody who they have, what the front is, you know, who we're working to, and all that stuff. And you know, to me, Phil is really become a really smart player too. But Phil's a little bit more of the, you know, he'll knock you down and then pick you up and smile at you. You know, so they'll both knock you down. You know, Ryan maybe will grunt at you a little bit, and you know, Phil is going to go really, really hard and knock you on the ground and do it with a smile and then pick you up and then do it again. They have different personalities, they have different temperaments, but they're both really exceptional football players and very good leaders for us in much different ways.
Obviously, it worked well, but what went into the thought process of, I guess, pounding the ball in that overtime drive and with going with Cade Carney at running back?
Well, at that point in the game, I mean, we had run 90-some plays, and we really felt like if you look at some of the drives that we had late in the game, 15 plays, 13 plays, you know, are really going into the game. We kind of looked at their D-line and said, you know what, they have a good starting D-line, but all their depth is freshmen. And we were really hoping that would be a unit as the game would wear on, would take over. And then as you get into overtime that they haven't scored, you know, you can play a little bit more conservatively. I really didn't want it coming down to a 42-yard field goal. But if it came down to a 35-yard field goal or a 30-yard field goal, I was very comfortable with that. And I just thought at that point, you know, let's not take a chance with a tip pass, you know, because we had the one slant late that they tipped and they almost picked. And, you know, I just think that we were at a point that we thought they had played a lot of football. We hoped we could wear them down and get some positive yards, and I certainly think when we get into that mode, that suits Cade's personality a little bit, of, you know, lowering his shoulder and getting those tough yards. And really the call of the game was the 3rd and 7 that we put the formation in the boundary and ran the stretch play to the field, and the O-line I mean, we were outnumbered and out-leveraged on that play, and Cade did a good job of dipping and then slipping to the outside, and then at that point we just were going to, you know, try to pound it inside. And on the game-winning play, I mean, we were outnumbered by 2 people, and Nate Gillum did a great job of taking his guy, and he actually drove his tackle into the safety. So Nate blocked 2 people and forced the safety over the top, and Cade just ran under him. So we just were, again, you can play that way a little bit more in overtime. You know, when you're the second possession, they haven't scored. And I just thought if we could get the ball past the 20-yard line, we'd have a really good chance of kicking the field goal and winning.
In the moment, did your staff and your players see Tulane sideline and how they were responding going into overtime? And were there any reaction to that viscerally?
I mean, everybody does their own thing. So, I mean, you know, if they win the game, people say, well, you know, you could tell they're going to win because their sideline was all excited and our guys were just moping around. And then you can look back and say, hey, those guys were jumping up and down and our guys were poised. So, you know, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I mean, we talked to our defense about what we needed to do, what we thought they would do. We made it just like a timeout. This is the situation. This is what has to happen. And, you know, and you see teams all over college football. It's the 4th quarter, and they're throwing water bottles and jumping up and down, and maybe that helps them win. You know, our style, for better or worse, is a little bit more, you know, let's go. It's business time. And, you know, when you win, you can say that's the reason. If we lost, you could be saying that's the reason. So, a lot of ways to cut it up.
Speaking of overtime and on defense for y'all, Willie Yarberry had a couple nice plays there, and him and Zeke seemed to be pretty good throughout the game. How important is it for them to maintain that throughout the season, I guess?
Those two have to be good players every game for us. I mean, Willie's had his best camp ever. Zeke, to me, is as focused as he's ever been. That's what happens when you get fifth-year seniors. The end is near, and they realize it, and you hope those guys don't waste time. And I thought Zeke in some ways, played his most complete game of his career. He maybe didn't have all those TFLs he had against Florida State last year, but in terms of doing his job, staying in his gap, playing with effort, it might have been the best game Zeke Rodney's had. And Willie Yarberry in overtime, I mean, he was in their backfield. And they're good players. And they played a lot of plays. They didn't play the 90 or 100 that the O-line did or our receivers did, but they played their best football at the end.